Billionaire hears Black housemaid speak 7 languages. What he does next leaves his wife more jealous. The words flowed from her lips like silk. French to the ambassador, Mandarin to the businessman, Arabic to the oil executive, and David Chun realized he'd been living with a genius disguised as his housemaid. Hello, my beautiful family. My heart is bursting with warmth and gratitude just knowing you're all here with me today. Before we get deep into this story, please let me know in the comment section where you're watching from. Before I forget, I want to welcome you guys to a new month. I pray this month brings joy, peace, and more awesome opportunities to you and your family. Amen. If you haven't subscribed to this amazing family, please do so now. Yeah, it's a family, and not just a channel. Subscribe now, not because I just told you to do so, but because you love us and your love means the whole world to us as a family. Thank you so very much. Now, my friends, let's get into today's amazing story. David Chun stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, 47 floors above Manhattan, watching ants in expensive suits scurry across the sidewalks below. His reflection stared back, sharp jawline, graying temples that his stylist insisted made him look distinguished, and eyes that his business rivals called ruthless. At 42, he commanded a tech empire worth $12 billion, yet the hollow ache in his chest suggested he was bankrupt in ways that mattered. His phone buzzed with the 15th call of the morning. Mr. Chun, the Japanese investors are here for the 10 a.m., his assistant chirped through the speaker. Tell them, I'll be down in 5. He straightened his Italian silk tie, a ritual as automatic as breathing. The merger with Tanaka Industries would add another billion to his net worth, but the number felt as meaningless as his marriage to Victoria. A beautiful arrangement that looked perfect in Forbes magazine spreads, but felt like acting in a play he'd forgotten he'd auditioned for. The elevator descended through floors of his empire, each level housing hundreds of employees whose names he'd never bothered to learn. They were functions, not people. Revenue generators, not humans. That's how he'd built his fortune, by reducing everything to its essential utility. 30 blocks away, in the service elevator of his Fifth Avenue mansion, Amara Baptiste pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall and allowed herself 30 seconds of exhaustion. Her shift began at 5 a.m., and her feet already ached in the sensible shoes that had carried her through 6 hours of invisible labor. She was 38 years old, though the other staff often mistook her for younger, perhaps because subservience had a way of erasing years from how people perceived you. She adjusted her uniform, a crisp gray dress that made her disappear into the expensive wallpaper of the Chun mansion. Invisibility was survival. In her former life, she had stood before lecture halls filled with eager students, her voice commanding attention as she dissected the nuances of comparative literature. Dr. Amara Baptiste had been her name then, before the world crumbled and she learned that degrees from Harvard meant nothing when you had no connections, no family wealth, no safety net. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the main floor. She stepped into the marble foyer, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across surfaces that cost more than most people's homes. Mrs. Victoria Chen's voice echoed from the drawing room, sharp and imperious as she berated the florist over the phone about arrangements for tonight's dinner party. The orchids are completely wrong. I specifically said white phalaenopsis, not these cheap grocery store flowers. Amara moved through the shadows, dusting surfaces that were already spotless, her practiced hands working while her mind wandered to the books hidden in her small room, 7 languages worth of literature that she read by lamplight after 18-hour days. Cervantes in Spanish, Goethe in German, Rumi in Persian. The words were her secret rebellion, proof that David Chun might own her labor, but he could never own her mind. She paused at the family portrait hanging in the hallway, David and Victoria, on their wedding day, both smiling with the practiced perfection of people who knew they were playing roles. Victoria's blonde hair was arranged in elaborate waves, her blue eyes cold even in celebration. David looked younger than 5 years ago, though something in his expression suggested he was already somewhere else, already calculating his next acquisition. Amara, Victoria's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. The baccarat glasses need to be hand-polished again. I don't care that you did them yesterday. They're not perfect. Yes, Mrs. Chun. Amara's voice was soft, trained to carry just enough acknowledgement without personality. She had learned to make herself small, to speak only when spoken to exist in the spaces between their awareness. As she worked, she listened to Victoria's phone calls about the evening's dinner party, a gathering of international business leaders and diplomats that would determine whether David's latest venture succeeded or failed. The guest list read like a United Nations roster: the French ambassador, Japanese industrialists, German tech moguls, Russian oligarchs. All men who spoke different languages but shared the same hunger for power and profit. Victoria hung up and swept into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the marble floors like a countdown timer. "This dinner party has to be perfect, Amara. My husband's reputation depends on it, which means everything depends on it. I won't have you embarrassing us." "Of course not, Mrs. Chun. And make sure you stay in the kitchen once service begins. I don't want the help visible while we're entertaining." Amara nodded, her jaw tight. She had served at dozens of these gatherings, watching powerful people negotiate deals that would reshape industries while she remained invisible, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates. They spoke around her as if she were furniture, discussing sensitive business matters in multiple languages, never imagining that the black woman in the gray uniform understood every word. Tonight would be different, though she didn't know it yet. Tonight, her silence would break, her invisibility would shatter, and the carefully constructed walls between their worlds would come crashing down as Amara prepares for another evening of invisibility while David continues his empty pursuit of wealth. What do you think it would take for two people from such different worlds to truly see each other? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt invisible in plain sight? The Chun Mansion's dining room glowed under the warmth of a dozen candles, their flames dancing across polished mahogany and reflecting off crystal that cost more than most people's cars. David sat at the head of the table, his smile as carefully crafted as the 7-course meal being served. Around him, 8 of the world's most powerful men spoke in a symphony of languages: English peppered with French, rapid-fire Japanese, guttural German, and flowing Arabic. The Tanaka Industries deal hung in the balance. $12 billion in international partnerships, enough to cement David's legacy as one of the decade's most successful entrepreneurs. But as the evening progressed, the conversation grew increasingly fragmented. Ambassador Laurent spoke only French to the German industrialist, who responded in German. The Russian oil executive answered in Russian, while the Japanese investors retreated into rapid Mandarin among themselves. Victoria sat rigid at the opposite end of the table, her smile brittle as porcelain. She understood enough French from her Swiss boarding school days to catch fragments, but the technical business discussions in multiple languages left her stranded on the shores of her own dinner party. "Gentlemen," David raised his wine glass, trying to regain control. "Perhaps we could—" Non, Ambassador Laurent waved dismissively. "Ce contrat est trop compliqué pour les explications simples." He turned to speak rapid French to his aide, who whispered urgently in his ear. The Japanese CEO, Hiroshi Tanaka, frowned and spoke sharp Japanese to his team. David caught the word "problem" from somewhere in the conversation, but couldn't follow the linguistic maze that followed. Tension crackled through the room like electricity before a storm. David felt his empire slipping through his fingers, lost in translation. That's when Amara appeared. She moved through the dining room with her usual ghost-like precision, refilling water glasses and removing empty plates. David barely noticed her. She was part of the furniture, invisible as always. But as she reached Ambassador Laurent's seat, the impossible happened. "Pardonnez-moi, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur." Her voice was soft but clear, the French flowing from her lips like silk. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the contract terms." The room fell silent. Every head turned toward the black woman in the gray uniform who had just spoken perfect Parisian French to one of Europe's most powerful diplomats. Laurent's eyebrows shot up. "Vous parlez français?" "Oui, monsieur." Amara's posture remained humble, but her voice carried quiet confidence. "Mr. Tanaka expressed concern about the environmental impact clauses, but I believe he's referring to Section 12, not Section 10 as mentioned." She turned to the Japanese CEO and switched seamlessly to Japanese, her pronunciation flawless. "Tanjong-san ni tsuite no ben alija dekimasu. Shikashi gnadishiro balan kudasai." Tanaka's jaw dropped. He responded in rapid Japanese, and Amara nodded, then turned to the German industrialist. Herr Müller, die Weltbestemungen, über die Herr Tanaka spricht, sind in Abschnittswolf klar definiert, nicht in Abschnittzen. The German leaned forward, incredulous. Sie sprechen Deutsch? Wie ist das möglich? Before anyone could process what was happening, the Russian executive began speaking aggressively in Russian about mineral rights. Without missing a beat, Amara responded in fluent Russian, then translated his concerns into Arabic for the Saudi oil minister, who nodded appreciatively and responded in Arabic, which she immediately interpreted back into English for the table. Mr. Petrov is concerned about the extraction rights in the Siberian territories, she said, her voice steady despite the shocked stares. And Minister Al-Rashid agrees that the proposed timeline might conflict with the OPEC agreements. David felt the world tilt on its axis. This woman, this person he had walked past for 3 years without truly seeing, was conducting a 7-language symphony of international diplomacy in his dining room. The fragments of conversation that had been tearing his deal apart were being woven together by someone he had considered invisible. Victoria's face had gone white, her wine glass trembling in her hand. How many languages do you speak? David's voice came out as a whisper. Amara's eyes met his for the first time in 3 years of employment. In them, he saw not subservience, but depth, oceans of intelligence that had been hidden behind careful masks of invisibility. 7. Mr. Chun. Her voice was quiet, professional, but something had shifted. The mask had slipped, and he glimpsed the brilliant woman underneath. Sometimes 8, depending on how you count dialects. The business leaders around the table began talking excitedly, not to each other, but to Amara. She became the center of translation, the bridge between worlds, turning chaos into clarity. Within 20 minutes, she had untangled 3 major misunderstandings and identified the real sticking points in the negotiation. David watched, mesmerized, as this woman he had never truly seen commanded the respect of some of the world's most powerful men. She wasn't just translating words, she was translating cultures, contexts, nuances that only someone with deep understanding could navigate. Ambassador Laurent stood and extended his hand to Amara. Mademoiselle, your linguistic skills are extraordinary. Where did you study? Harvard, monsieur. Comparative literature with a focus on translation theory. Harvard. Tanaka looked stunned. You have doctorate? Yes, sir. The room erupted in appreciative murmurs. These titans of industry were treating his housemaid, with more respect than they'd shown him all evening. That David's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't name. Shame? Wonder? Something deeper, more dangerous. For the first time in years, he felt truly awake, as if he'd been sleepwalking through his own life until this moment. Victoria's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. I need some air, she announced, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. She swept from the room, but not before David caught the flash of something dark in her eyes. Fear, jealousy, recognition that the careful balance of her world had just shifted. As the evening continued, and deals were struck with Amara's help, David found himself studying her with new eyes. Every gesture, every response revealed layers of intelligence and grace he had been blind to. The woman who had been invisible was suddenly the most fascinating person in the room, and that terrified him more than any business deal ever had. The guests had departed 2 hours ago, their business cards exchanged and deals tentatively struck. But David remained in his study, staring at the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. The ice had long since melted, leaving the whiskey diluted and warm. Much like his sense of reality after the evening's revelations, he had built his fortune on reading people, on identifying their value and leveraging it for profit. Yet for 3 years, a Harvard-educated polyglot had been cleaning his toilets and polishing his silverware while he remained oblivious to her worth. The realization gnawed at him like a physical ache. That a soft knock interrupted his brooding. Come in. Amara entered, back in her invisible uniform, carrying a silver tray with coffee and his usual late-night snack. She moved with the same quiet efficiency as always, but David now noticed the perfect posture, the graceful way she navigated the space. Details that spoke of a different kind of upbringing than he'd assumed. Your coffee, Mr. Chun. She set the tray on his desk without meeting his eyes. Amara. Her name felt foreign on his tongue. How many times had he actually spoken it? What you did tonight, that was extraordinary. She stiffened, her hands gripping the empty tray. I apologize. If I overstepped. I only wanted to help with the communication issues. Overstepped? David stood, moving closer. You saved a $12 billion deal. I should return to my duties. She stepped backward, putting distance between them. Mrs. Chun is waiting for her evening tea. Harvard, David said, the words stopping her retreat. You have a doctorate from Harvard. Why are you working as a maid? The words came out sharper than she intended, and she immediately softened her tone. I'm sorry, Mr. Chun. I didn't mean to. No, don't apologize. I'm the one who should be apologizing. I never asked, never bothered to know anything about you beyond whether you could dust my antiques. Amara's laugh was bitter. Asking would have been dangerous for both of us. People like me don't stay employed long when we remind people like you of what we used to be. The casual way she said people like me and people like you hit David like a slap. He wanted to argue, to deny the class divide she was highlighting, but the words died in his throat. She was right. He had never seen her as anything more than a function. I need this job, Mr. Chun. Her voice was quiet but firm. I need the health insurance, the steady paycheck, the reference when I eventually move on. What happened tonight? It can't happen again. But you're brilliant. You could be what? Teaching? I tried that. The academic world is smaller than you think, and once you're marked as difficult or overly political, doors close quickly. She met his eyes for the first time since entering the room. I had opinions about diversity in literature curricula. I questioned some established interpretations. I made some powerful people uncomfortable. David felt something twist in his chest, guilt, admiration, an emotion he couldn't name. So you became invisible instead. I became practical. This job feeds me, houses me, keeps me safe. I read my books at night, I send money to my sister's children, and I survive. It's not the life I planned, but it's the life I have. Before David could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway. She had changed. From her dinner dress into a silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the late hour. Her eyes moved between David and Amara with the calculating gaze of a woman who had built her identity on being the smartest person in any room. Amara, I've been waiting for my tea for 20 minutes. I apologize, Mrs. Chun. I was just having a conversation with my husband about your talents. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. How fascinating that you've been hiding such abilities. Makes one wonder what else you might be hiding. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. David felt Amara's retreat into invisibility, watching her shoulders curve inward as she made herself smaller. Victoria, oh, David, I'm not criticizing. I'm simply curious about our employee's background. After all, we should know who we're trusting with our home, shouldn't we? She turned to Amara. Tell me, how does someone with a Harvard doctorate end up cleaning houses? Financial troubles? Legal issues? Family problems? Each question landed like a physical blow. David watched Amara's face carefully compose itself into a mask of professional neutrality, but he caught the flash of pain in her eyes. Nothing like that, Mrs. Chun. Sometimes life simply takes unexpected turns. Indeed it does. Victoria's smile widened. Well, I suppose we should all be grateful for your unexpected talents. Though I do hope tonight's performance won't give you ideas above your station. The cruelty in those words made David's jaw clench. He started to speak, but Amara cut him off. Of course not, Mrs. Chun. If you'll excuse me, I'll prepare your tea. Immediately, she fled the room, leaving David alone with his wife and the bitter taste of his own complicity. He had allowed Victoria to wound this remarkable woman, had stood by while she was diminished and threatened. Really, David, Victoria said, settling into the chair across from his desk. You look like someone died. She's the help, not a visiting dignitary. She saved tonight's deal. She did her job. A bit more dramatically than usual, but still just her job. Victoria examined her manicured nails. I think we should discuss her future employment. Someone with her ambitions might not be the best fit for our household. The threat was clear. Victoria would fire Amara if David showed too much interest. And David, despite his wealth and power, felt trapped by the very social structures that had made him rich. She's an excellent employee, he said carefully. She's an excellent employee who knows her place. Let's keep it that way." As Victoria left to receive her tea, David remained in his study, staring at the closed door. 2 hours ago, he had witnessed something extraordinary, a brilliant mind revealing itself despite every effort to remain hidden. Now, all three of them were retreating into familiar roles: the oblivious employer, the threatened wife, and the invisible genius. But something had changed. David could feel it in the air, in the way his chest tightened when he thought of Amara's careful mask of professional neutrality. He had glimpsed something real, something magnificent, and he wasn't sure he could go back to pretending he hadn't seen it. The question was whether he was brave enough to act on that knowledge, or whether he would let fear and social convention bury it again. The crisis arrived at 6:47 a.m. with a phone call that shattered David's uneasy sleep. His CFO's voice crackled through the speaker, panic barely contained beneath professional composure. "David, we have a problem. The Germans are pulling out. Mueller claims there was a misunderstanding about the environmental clauses, and Tanaka is threatening to follow suit. If we lose them both, the entire Asian expansion collapses." David sat up in bed, his mind instantly sharp despite the early hour. "That's impossible. Everything was clarified last night, apparently not well enough. Mueller's team is saying the translation was inadequate, that key legal terminology was misinterpreted. They're flying back to Frankfurt this afternoon unless we can provide certified legal translations of the entire contract in German, Japanese, and Russian by noon." David's blood ran cold. Noon? That's 5 hours. Every translation service in the city is booked solid, and the few available can't guarantee legal accuracy for a contract this complex. "David, if we lose this deal..." He didn't need to finish. David knew exactly what would happen. 3 years of negotiations, hundreds of millions in development costs, and his reputation as the man who could close any deal, all gone. "I'll handle it," David said, though he had no idea how. 40 minutes later, he stood in his kitchen, still in his pajamas and robe, watching Amara prepare breakfast with her usual quiet efficiency. Victoria had left early for a spa weekend in the Hamptons, claiming she needed to recover from the stress of hosting international guests. "Amara," he said, his voice rougher than intended. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, Mr. Chun? I need your help." The words felt foreign, asking rather than commanding. "The business deal from last night, it's falling apart. The Germans and Japanese are claiming translation errors. I need someone who can provide legally accurate translations in German, Japanese, and Russian by noon." Her hand stilled on the coffee cup she was drying. "Mr. Chun, I know what you said last night about keeping your head down, but this is different. This isn't about showing off. This is about saving something that matters." He ran his hands through his hair, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'll pay you whatever you want. Name your price." Amara set down the cup carefully, her expression thoughtful. "You're asking me to risk everything I told you I couldn't afford to risk. I'm asking you to use your extraordinary abilities to save something you helped create. Those men respected you last night more than they've ever respected me. And what happens after? When your wife returns and finds out I've overstepped again?" David felt something shift inside him, a decision crystallizing. "Then I'll deal with Victoria. This is my choice, my responsibility." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken implications. Finally, Amara nodded. "I'll need access to the original contracts and legal databases. And we'll need to work somewhere private. These documents contain sensitive information. My home office. It has everything you need." For the next 4 hours, David's world shrank to the mahogany-paneled sanctuary of his study. Amara sat at his desk, 3 laptops open, legal documents spread across every surface. She worked with focused intensity, her fingers flying across keyboards as she crafted translations that captured not just words, but legal nuances and cultural contexts. David found himself mesmerized by her process. She would read a clause in English, her lips moving silently as she worked through the implications, then craft responses in German that were poetry and precision combined. When she switched to Japanese, her entire demeanor changed, more formal, more deferential, capturing cultural subtleties that went far beyond language. "The Russian section is tricky," she said, pausing to rub her temples. "The mineral rights. Terminology doesn't translate directly. We need to account for Soviet-era legal precedents that still influence Russian business law. How do you know Soviet legal precedents? She glanced up, caught in a moment of unguarded expertise. I spent a summer in Moscow during graduate school, working with archival documents. Legal language reflects historical power structures. You can't properly translate modern Russian business contracts without understanding how Soviet collective ownership concepts still influence contemporary legal thinking. David stared at her, feeling like an anthropologist discovering a new species. What else don't I know about you? The question hung in the air, more loaded than either intended. Amara's cheeks flushed slightly. A lot, I imagine. Tell me something. Anything. She hesitated, then spoke quietly while continuing to type. I used to dream in different languages. When I was working on my dissertation, I'd go to sleep thinking in French, dream in German, and wake up with Arabic phrases on my lips. My brain couldn't turn off the translations. What changed? Life got smaller. When you only speak English for 3 years, the other languages start to fade. Use it or lose it. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. Last night was the first time in years I felt like myself again. The admission hit David like a physical blow. He moved closer, close enough to smell her subtle perfume. Something clean and understated, nothing like Victoria's expensive French fragrances. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For not seeing you. For wasting 3 years of extraordinary talent. For letting you disappear. Amara stopped typing entirely, her hands resting on the keys. Mr. Chun, David. Please just... David. She turned in the chair to face him, and suddenly the distance between them felt charged with something dangerous. David, then. You couldn't have known. I made sure you couldn't know. But I should have tried. I should have seen past the uniform to the person wearing it. That's not how the world works for people like us. Maybe it should be. The words hung between them, a challenge to everything they both understood about their respective places in the world. David found himself studying her face. The intelligent eyes, the full lips that spoke 7 languages, the elegant neck that had been hidden beneath carefully chosen uniforms for 3 years. The translations, Amara said softly, not breaking eye contact. We should finish them. Right. The translations. But neither of them moved. The air in the study felt thick with possibility and danger, with the recognition that something fundamental was shifting between them. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but inside this room, 2 people were discovering each other for the first time. The phone rang, shattering the moment. David's CFO again, voice tight with anxiety. David, please tell me you have good news. Send them over, David said, his eyes never leaving Amara's face. We have everything they need. As Amara turned back to make final adjustments to the documents, David realized that saving his business deal had become secondary to something else entirely. The overwhelming need to know more about this extraordinary woman who had been hiding in plain sight. The contracts were sent, the crisis averted, but David found himself reluctant to end their collaboration. As Amara gathered the scattered documents from his desk, he noticed something that made him pause. A small, leather-bound notebook that had fallen from her bag. You dropped this, he said, bending to retrieve it. As he picked it up, the notebook fell open to a page covered in elegant handwriting. Not English, French, interspersed with what looked like Arabic script and German phrases. But it wasn't the languages that caught his attention. It was the photograph tucked between the pages that a younger Amara stood in academic robes, beaming beside a small girl with similar features. Her sister, he assumed. Both wore expressions of pure joy, the kind that comes from dreams realized rather than deferred. That was my graduation from Harvard, Amara said quietly, noticing his gaze. My doctorate defense. Keisha, my sister, flew up from Atlanta. She was so proud she cried during my presentation. David studied the photograph, struck by the transformation. This woman radiated confidence, intellectual fire, the kind of presence that commanded rooms. What happened? He asked gently. Amara sank into the chair across from his desk, the careful mask of professionalism finally slipping. I got a tenure-track position at Emory University. Finally, everything I'd worked for. I was teaching comparative literature, focusing on post-colonial narratives and linguistic preservation in marginalized communities. That sounds like meaningful work. It was. until I published a paper questioning the Western canon's dominance in literary curricula. I argued that requiring students to read 12 white male authors and one token diverse voice wasn't education. It was indoctrination. Her laugh was bitter. The department head called my research divisive and politically motivated. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. They fired you for that. Not directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they made my life impossible. My course loads increased. My research funding disappeared. My graduate students were reassigned. When I applied for tenure, suddenly my publications weren't impactful enough. My teaching evaluations were inconsistent. She touched the photograph gently. Academic blacklisting is very real and very effective. But surely other universities would hire the difficult professor who'd been denied tenure at Emory? Academia is smaller than you think, David. Word travels fast about who's a team player and who rocks the boat. She closed the notebook carefully. I spent 2 years applying for positions, watching my savings disappear. Keisha was diagnosed with lupus around the same time, and her medical bills. She trailed off, but David could fill in the blanks. A proud, brilliant woman forced to choose between her principles and survival, between her sister's medical needs and her own academic dreams. How did you end up here? Domestic employment doesn't require references from dissertation committees. It pays well enough to cover Keisha's treatments and her children's school supplies. And it allows me to disappear, which sometimes feels like the safest option. She looked up at him. I told myself it was temporary. That was 3 years ago. David felt ashamed of his own privilege in a way he'd never experienced. While he'd been accumulating wealth through tech acquisitions, this extraordinary woman had been scrubbing his floors to pay for her sister's chemotherapy. I should have known, he said. I should have seen. No. Amara's voice was firm. I made sure you wouldn't see. Invisibility was survival. If you'd known about my background, about my education, it would have made you uncomfortable. Rich people don't like being reminded that their housekeepers might be more educated than they are. The truth of her words stung because David recognized himself in them. How many times had he assumed competence based on appearance, education, based on accent, worth based on wealth? Tell me about your family, Amara said, deflecting attention from her own pain. You never talk about them. David was quiet for a long moment, surprised by his own willingness to share. There's not much to tell. My parents were efficient. Everything was about achievement, accumulation, status. Love was conditional on performance. He moved to the window, looking out at the city below. My father built his fortune in manufacturing. Very traditional, very hierarchical. Workers were expendable resources, not people with families and dreams. He taught me that sentiment was weakness, that successful people couldn't afford to get attached. And your mother? Agreed with him completely. They were a perfect team, ambitious, calculating, emotionally unavailable. David's reflection stared back at him from the window. They died in a car accident when I was 25. I inherited everything and realized I felt nothing. Not grief, not loss, not even relief. Just emptiness. Amara was quiet for a moment. Is that why you married? Victoria? Victoria made sense. Same background, same values, same understanding that marriage was a business arrangement. She was beautiful, connected, the perfect wife for a man building an empire. He turned back to face Amara. I convinced myself that was enough. That wanting more was naive. But it wasn't enough. No, it wasn't. David sat on the edge of his desk, closer to her chair. I've been sleepwalking through my own life, going through the motions of what I thought success looked like. Until last night, when I saw you speaking those languages, commanding respect from men who barely acknowledged my existence. David, I saw someone who was fully alive, fully present, fully herself. And I realized I haven't been any of those things in years. Maybe ever. The air between them grew charged again, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Amara reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing his hand. The contact was electric, sending warmth up his arm and into his chest. We're both running from who we used to be, she said softly. You from your parents' cold ambition, me from my own dreams. Maybe we don't have to run anymore. David, this is dangerous. For both of us. I can't afford to lose this job, and you can't afford to. To what? To feel something real for the first time in my adult life? Before she could respond, They heard the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the window, David saw Victoria's Mercedes, back from the Hamptons a day early. His wife stepped out, her expression already suspicious as she noticed the drawn curtains in his study. "She's back," Amara whispered, quickly standing and smoothing her uniform. But the damage was done. They had crossed a line, shared truths that couldn't be unspoken. As Victoria's heels clicked across the marble foyer, David and Amara stood frozen in his study, surrounded by the evidence of their collaboration and the weight of their growing connection. The reckoning was coming, and neither of them was prepared for what it would cost. Victoria's reunion with David was perfunctory, a brief kiss on the cheek and complaints about traffic from the Hamptons. She seemed distracted, immediately retreating to her room to freshen up and make phone calls. For once, David was grateful for his wife's self-absorption. The next 3 days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, David found reasons to work from his home office instead of going to the corporate headquarters. The successful contract translations had created a ripple effect, more international clients requesting Amara's services. Though David was careful to present her contributions as consulting work rather than acknowledging her full capabilities, that it was Tuesday afternoon when everything shifted. David was reviewing quarterly reports when he heard something that made him pause. Laughter. Not the practiced social laughter he was accustomed to in his world, but genuine, unguarded joy. Following the sound, he found Amara in the conservatory, speaking rapid Spanish into her phone. "Sí, Mija, I promise. Your tia Amara will be there for your graduation. Tell your mama, I'm sending the money for your dress this week." Her voice was warm, animated in a way he'd never heard. "You're going to be the most beautiful valedictorian in Atlanta." She noticed David in the doorway and quickly switched to English. "I have to go, sweetheart. Study hard. Te amo." "Your niece?" David asked as she hung up. "Keisha's daughter, Maria. She's graduating high school next month. Got a full scholarship to Spelman College." Pride radiated from Amara's face. "She wants to be a doctor, help people like her mother." "That's wonderful. She's brilliant. Gets it from her mother." Amara's expression softened with memory. "Keisha was always the smart one, even though I was the one who went to graduate school. She could have been anything, doctor, lawyer, engineer. But she got pregnant at 17, and then life got in the way." "Life got in the way." Amara smiled sadly. "But she's living her dreams through Maria now. That scholarship means everything." David found himself drawn deeper into the conservatory, where late afternoon sunlight filtered through glass walls, creating prisms of color across the floor. Amara had been watering Victoria's orchids, a task that seemed almost meditative the way she performed it. "You love them," he observed, watching her gentle care with the delicate flowers. "Plants don't judge. They don't care about your degrees, or your accent, or whether you belong in the room. They just need water, sunlight, attention." She touched a pale pink bloom tenderly. "Your wife has beautiful taste. Victoria doesn't actually tend them. She just likes how they look." "I know." Amara's voice held no judgment, just observation. "Beauty for its own sake has value too." David moved closer, close enough to see the small smile playing at her lips. "You're very generous with your assessments." "I've had to be. Bitterness is a luxury I can't afford." "And what about happiness? Is that a luxury too?" The question hung in the air between them. Amara set down the watering can and turned to face him fully. In the golden light of the conservatory, she looked ethereal, like something from a Renaissance painting. "I used to think so. But these past few days..." She hesitated, then continued. "When I'm translating your contracts, using my mind the way it was trained to be used, I remember what it feels like to be fully alive. You should be running a university department, not watering orchids." "Should" is a dangerous word. It implies the world is fair, that merit matters more than connections. She moved to another plant, a small gesture of self-protection. "But sometimes, in moments like this, I can pretend that different choices were possible." David watched her work, mesmerized by the graceful economy of her movements. "What would you do? If you could do anything?" "You mean besides teaching?" She considered the question seriously. "I'd open a cultural center. Somewhere that celebrated linguistic diversity, that taught children their heritage languages were valuable. I'd create programs for immigrants, help them preserve their stories while learning new ones." "That sounds beautiful. It's just a dream. Dreams have a way of becoming reality when the right person believes in them. Amara paused, her hands stilling on the leaves of a fern. David, we should be careful. This conversation, whatever this is between us, it's not safe. I know. He moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. But I can't seem to stop myself from wanting to know everything about you. Your dreams, your fears, the way you think about the world. Why? Because you're the most interesting person I've ever met. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I used to want to be before I became who I thought I needed to be. The air between them grew thick with possibility. David reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing a strand of hair that had escaped from her neat bun. Amara's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. This is madness, she whispered. The best. Things usually are. For a moment, they stood suspended in golden light. Two people from different worlds discovering they shared the same longing for something real, something meaningful. David's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the elegant line of her cheekbone. I haven't felt this alive in years, he admitted. Neither have I. They might have kissed then, might have crossed the final line between employer and employee, between the world they inhabited and the world they imagined. But the moment was shattered by the sharp click of heels on marble. David, where are you? Victoria's voice cut through the conservatory like a blade. Amara stepped back quickly, creating distance, but the damage was done. The intimacy between them was palpable, written in the charged air and the way they both struggled to compose themselves. I should go, Amara whispered, but her eyes remained locked on his. Amara, David. Victoria's voice was closer now, accompanied by the rustle of expensive fabric. I need to speak with you about the Henderson Charity Gala. And someone needs to explain why our housemate has been spending so much time in your office. The spell was broken. Reality crashed back with the weight of social expectations, marriage vows, and the careful boundaries that kept their worlds separate. But as Amara hurried toward the service entrance, David caught her hand for just a moment. This isn't finished, he said quietly. She squeezed his fingers once, briefly, then disappeared through the door just as Victoria entered the conservatory, her expression sharp with suspicion and barely contained jealousy. David and Amara are discovering a connection that transcends their different worlds, but societal boundaries and Victoria's suspicions threaten to tear them apart. What do you think it takes for two people to overcome the barriers that society places between them? Share your thoughts on whether love can truly conquer all in the comments below. Victoria Chen had not built her life on naivety. The daughter of a pharmaceutical fortune, she had learned early that power was maintained through vigilance, that threats were eliminated before they could take root. She had watched her husband's behavior for the past week with the calculating attention of a woman who understood that everything she had could disappear if she wasn't careful. The evidence was subtle but unmistakable. David's sudden preference for working from home, his distracted air during conversations, and the way he looked at their housemaid when he thought no one was watching. Most damning of all was the change in Amara herself. A confidence that hadn't been there before, a light in her eyes that spoke of someone who had remembered her own worth. Victoria had built her marriage on being the smartest person in David's orbit. She would not be replaced by the help. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Friday evening, she announced she was attending a gallery opening with friends and wouldn't return until late. She kissed David goodbye, complimented Amara on the dinner preparations, and left the house with theatrical fanfare. Then she parked 3 blocks away and waited. It took less than an hour. She slipped back through the service entrance, moving through her own home like a burglar. The murmur of voices led her to David's study, where she positioned herself in the hallway, close enough to hear everything. Can't keep pretending this isn't happening. David's voice, raw with emotion. David, please. We've been over this. Amara's voice was strained, fighting something. This situation, what we're feeling, it's not real. It's proximity, shared experiences under pressure. People in crisis situations often develop artificial bonds. Don't intellectualize this away. What I feel for you isn't artificial. It has to be. The pain in Amara's voice was unmistakable. Because if it's real, then we're both lost. I lose my job, my ability to support my family. You lose your marriage, your reputation, you're standing in a world that's given you everything. What If I don't care about those things anymore, you will. When the novelty wears off, when people start talking, when your business associates start wondering about your judgment, you'll care. And then where will I be? Victoria felt a cold satisfaction. The housemaid was smarter than she'd given her credit for, but not smart enough to walk away entirely. You're afraid, David said. Of course I'm afraid. I'm a black woman with a complicated employment history who's developed feelings for her married billionaire employer. This isn't a fairy tale, David. This is the kind of situation that destroys lives. Then why haven't you quit? Why haven't you walked away if you're so certain it will end badly? The silence stretched long enough that Victoria held her breath. Because Amara's voice was barely a whisper. Because for the first time in 3 years, I feel like myself again. Because when you look at me, you see Dr. Baptiste, not just the maid. Because when we work together, I remember what it feels like to be valued for my mind. Amara, but that doesn't make this right. It doesn't change the facts of our situation. Victoria had heard enough. She stepped into the doorway, her expression composed despite the fury burning in her chest. How touching, she said, her voice cutting through the moment like a scalpel. Though I have to say, the facts of your situation are about to become much clearer. Both David and Amara sprang apart, guilt written across their faces. David moved protectively toward Amara, a gesture that sent white-hot rage through Victoria's carefully controlled demeanor. Victoria, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been having an emotional affair with our employee? That you've been using our home as your personal therapy session while I was conveniently away? Victoria's smile was predatory. Oh, darling. I heard everything. Amara stepped forward, her chin raised despite the tremor in her voice. Mrs. Chun, nothing inappropriate has happened. Mr. Chun and I have been working on business translations. Working. Victoria laughed, the sound sharp. And cruel. Is that what we're calling it? How professional. How innovative. Victoria, enough. David's voice carried warning. Don't take this out on Amara. Whatever anger you have should be directed at me. How noble. How protective. Tell me, David, does she make you feel like a white knight? Rescuing the poor, brilliant, black woman from her circumstances? How satisfying that must be for your ego. The words hit their target. Amara flinched as if she'd been slapped, and Victoria saw the exact moment when doubt crept into her eyes. That's enough, David said, his voice deadly quiet, but Victoria was just getting started. I've done my research, you know. Dr. Amara Baptiste, formerly of Emory University, denied tenure for being, what was the phrase? Divisive and politically motivated. Tell me, Amara, is seducing married men part of your political activism now? You have no right. Amara started, but Victoria cut her off. I have every right. This is my home, my husband, my life you're playing with. Did you really think you could manipulate your way into our world? That your sob story about your sick sister would make David fall in love with your what? Your tragic circumstances. Each word was chosen to wound, to reduce Amara's intelligence and dignity to manipulation and opportunism. Victoria watched with satisfaction as Amara's composure cracked. Stop it, Victoria. David stepped between them. I won't let you destroy her because you're threatened by her. Victoria's laugh was genuinely amused now. David, she's the help. She cleans our toilets and makes our beds. The fact that she has a few degrees doesn't change the fundamental reality of what she is and what we are. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria saw her words land like physical blows, not just on Amara, but on David as well. She had stripped away the romantic fantasy they'd built and exposed the ugly social realities underneath. Get out, David said quietly. I beg your pardon. Not you, he said, still not looking at Victoria. Amara, you should go, before this gets worse. Amara stood frozen for a moment, her face a mask of dignity wrapped around devastating pain. She looked at David, perhaps hoping he would fight harder, demand that Victoria apologize, choose her over his wife's cruelty. Instead, she saw a man caught between worlds, paralyzed by the very social structures she had warned him about. You're right, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I should go. She walked past both of them, her spine straight, her head high. At the doorway, she paused without turning around. For what it's worth, Mr. Chun, these past few days reminded me who I used to be. I hope someday you remember who you wanted to be. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a gunshot. Victoria smiled, victorious and venomous. Well, that's settled. I'll call the agency tomorrow for a replacement. David stared at the empty doorway, feeling something die inside his chest. In choosing silence over courage, safety over love, he had become exactly the man his father had raised him to be: successful, wealthy, and utterly hollow. The Manhattan skyline glittered through David Chin's penthouse office window, a constellation of ambition that mocked the emptiness in his chest. It had been 3 days since Amara walked out, her final words echoing like a verdict. I hope someday you remember who you wanted to be. He hadn't slept properly since, haunted by the memory of her dignified retreat and his own cowardice in letting Victoria's venom go unchallenged. His desk was cluttered with contracts, each one a reminder of Amara's brilliance. Her translations had saved his empire, yet he couldn't save her from humiliation. The whiskey in his glass, untouched, caught the light like liquid amber, but no amount of alcohol could dull the truth. He had chosen comfort over courage, status over substance. Victoria, meanwhile, had returned to her polished routine, arranging charity galas and lunching with socialites as if nothing had changed. Her victory was evident in the way she touched his arm at breakfast, a possessive gesture that felt like a leash. She had already hired a new housemaid, a quiet, unremarkable woman who moved through their home like a ghost. David hated how easily Amara had been erased. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his CFO, voice tense. David, the French ambassador's team just sent a follow-up on the Tanaka deal. They're requesting another round of translations, same languages as before. They specifically asked for the consultant who handled the last set. David's heart lurched. They asked for her by name? Not exactly, but it's clear they mean the woman from the dinner. Can we get her back? The deal's at risk without her. I'll handle it, David said, ending the call before doubt could creep in. He didn't know where Amara was, but he knew he had to find her, not just for the deal, but for himself, for the man he still might become. He started with the employment agency, but they had no forwarding address, only a note that Amara had declined a reference due to personal reasons. Next, he called his corporate investigators, a discreet firm used for vetting business partners. Within hours, they provided an address, a modest apartment in Brooklyn, shared with a roommate. Amara had already found work as a part-time translator for a nonprofit, scraping by on a fraction of what he'd paid her. The Brooklyn brownstone was a world away from his Fifth Avenue mansion, its chipped paint and creaking stairs a testament to survival over luxury. David stood outside her door, heart pounding, feeling like an intruder in her world. He knocked, and when the door opened, Amara stood there in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded neutrality. Mr. Chun, she said, voice cool but not cruel. What are you doing here? David, he corrected softly, echoing their earlier intimacy. I need to talk to you. Please. She hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him into a small living room filled with books, stacks of them, in every language he could imagine. The air smelled of coffee and old paper, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of his home. A single orchid sat on the windowsill, its pale petals catching the afternoon light, and David wondered if it was a quiet rebellion against Victoria's world. I owe you an apology, he began, standing awkwardly as she crossed her arms. For letting Victoria speak to you that way. For not fighting for you. For everything. Amara's gaze was steady, unflinching. Apologies don't change what happened, David. You made your choice. I made the wrong choice. His voice cracked, raw with regret. I've spent my life building something I thought mattered. Money, status, a marriage that looks good on paper. But it's all hollow. You showed me what real worth looks like, and I was too weak to stand up for it. She softened slightly, but her guard remained. What do you want from me? Absolution? Closure? I'm trying to rebuild my life here. I want you to come back. Not as a maid, never again. As a partner. The French ambassador's team needs your translations, and I need your mind, your perspective, your... He faltered, searching for the right word. Your truth. I'm offering you a role in my company, a platform to use your talents. And I'm offering to fight for us, if you'll let me. Amara laughed, a sound both bitter and incredulous. Us? David, you're still married. Your world doesn't bend for people like me. And I can't afford to break myself against it again. Then I'll bend it. He stepped closer, voice urgent. I'm filing for divorce. Victoria and I have been over for years. We just didn't admit it. I don't want to live a lie anymore. I want something real, with you, if you'll have me. But even if you say no, I want you to have the life you deserve. The cultural center you dreamed of. I'll fund it, no strings attached. Her eyes widened, searching his face for sincerity. Why now? Why risk everything? Because I finally see you, he said, echoing their thematic motif. And because I'm done being the man who lets fear win. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of their choices. Amara's fingers brushed the orchid's petals, a gesture that seemed to ground her. I need time, she said finally. To trust this. To trust you. And I need to do this on my terms. Not as your savior or your project, but as me. David nodded, relief flooding him despite the uncertainty. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As he left, the Brooklyn air felt lighter, charged with possibility. He had made his choice, not for wealth or status, but for something real. Now, it was up to Amara to decide if she could choose him back. 6 months later, the Manhattan Cultural Center for Linguistic Diversity opened its doors on a crisp spring evening, its glass facade glowing against the city's twilight. Inside, children laughed as they practiced phrases in Yoruba, Mandarin, and Spanish, while adults attended workshops on preserving heritage languages. At the center of it all stood Amara Baptiste, no longer invisible, her name on the building's dedication plaque as founder and director. David watched from the sidelines, a quiet pride warming his chest. He had kept his promise, funding the center with no expectation of reward, but Amara had invited him tonight, not as a benefactor, but as a partner. She wore a flowing blue dress that matched the center's logo, her presence commanding yet warm as she greeted guests with a smile that spoke of reclaimed dreams. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of transformation. David had finalized his divorce, a process that stripped away years of pretense. Victoria had fought bitterly, leveraging her social influence to paint him as reckless, but David found he no longer cared about the gossip pages. He had restructured his company, promoting diverse voices and launching ethical initiatives that, to align with the values Amara had awakened in him. His empire was smaller now, but it felt like his own for the first time. Amara had taken her time, as she'd promised, rebuilding her life on her own terms. She accepted a consulting role with David's firm, her translations becoming a cornerstone of their global outreach. Their work together was electric. Hours spent debating strategy, laughing over cultural nuances, their intellectual partnership a foundation stronger than any rushed romance. Slowly, trust grew into something neither could deny. Tonight, as Amara addressed the crowd, her voice carried the weight of her journey. This center is for everyone who's ever felt unseen, she said, her eyes finding David's across the room. For those whose worth was whispered in languages the world ignored. Here, we celebrate every voice, every story. The applause was thunderous, but David barely heard it. He saw only Amara, the professor, the dreamer, the woman who had taught him to see beyond surfaces. As the crowd dispersed, she approached him, her expression soft but resolute. You did this, he said, gesturing to the vibrant space around them. We did this, she corrected, her hand brushing his. You believed in my dream when I'd almost forgotten how. He took her hand, marveling at its strength. I used to think success was about numbers, billions, acquisitions, headlines. You showed me it's about moments like this. About seeing someone's worth and fighting for it. Amara's smile was radiant, unguarded. And you showed me I could trust again. That I could be Dr. Baptiste without losing myself. They stepped outside, the city's hum a backdrop to their quiet intimacy. Under the center's glowing sign, David pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, he said, the words simple but seismic. Not for what you can do, but for who you are. I love you too, she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. For seeing me. For choosing us. Their kiss was a promise, a union of two people who had crossed worlds to find each other. The city moved around them, indifferent to their revolution, but in that moment, they were infinite. Two souls transformed by the courage to see and be seen. As they walked back inside, hand in hand, the center buzzed with life. Children reciting poetry, elders sharing stories, and a tapestry of languages weaving something new. David glanced at Amara, her face alight with purpose, and knew he had finally become the man he'd always wanted to be, one who valued substance over status, love over legacy. David and Amara have found love and purpose by seeing each other's true worth, transcending the barriers of class and expectation. What does it mean to truly see someone in your own life? Share your stories of connection and transformation in the comments below. How have you overcome obstacles to honor someone's worth? My incredible story family, my heart is absolutely overflowing with gratitude for each and every one of you who stayed with me until the very last moment of this tale. You're the heartbeat of Mr. Paul's stories, sticking through every twist, turn, and emotion. Wow, what a gift you are. Your love and dedication warm my soul like a cozy fireside chat. May countless blessings shower upon you for sharing this journey with me. Until our next story, keep shining, my precious friends. I'm so thankful for you.